Hi. In the world of big ideas, there's always this never ending tug of war between two camps. The theists who are all in on the idea that there's a God up there, and the atheists who are pretty convinced there isn't. But hold up, it's not just a black and white scene. There's a third squad in this debate, the agnostics, coined by this fellow Thomas Henry Huxley, or you all know, back in the 1860s. Agnosticism is the label for folks who aren't quite ready to pick a side. They are like, God existing or not, can't say for sure. And here is a curveball. In another way of looking at it, anyone who is not jumping up and down saying, yep, God is real, gets lumped into the negative atheist group. That's right, agnostics get filed under this category too. Then you've got your positive atheists who are like Christopher Hitchens, like Richard Dawkins, a number of them, Sam Harris, who are dead set on the belief that there is no God. So in this twist, agnostics are kind of like a subset of negative atheists. So today let's discuss what is this agnosticism thing about. Picture it like this. You are mulling over something, but instead of picking a side, you just hang out in the middle, not sure which way to lean. It's like when you look at a tree and wonder, does it have an odd or even number of branches or leaves? So you're not about to start counting. So you just shrug and say, could be either. That's being agnostic on the leaf count. In the big brain circles of contemporary thinking of religion, agnosticism usually means you are doing the same thing, but with a much heftier question: God's existence. Agnostics are the folks who have given it some thought but decide to park themselves right on the fence, not ready to bet either way on whether there's a higher power out there. All right, let's set the record straight on what agnosticism isn't, because there are a few common mix-ups out there. First off, being agnostic doesn't mean you can't jive with religious faith. Some folks reckon agnostics can have what is called non-doxastic faith. That's a fancy way of saying you have faith, but it's not anchored in a firm belief in God. Instead, it's more about hope or other feel-good vibes. Agnostics might not be sure if there's a God, but they are open to the possibility, and that opens the door to this kind of hopeful faith. Another way agnostics might roll is by treating religion like a story that guides their actions, kind of like how you might live by the lessons in your favorite novel. It's a cool fit for agnostics, but hey, that doesn't mean they've got to feel one way or the other about religion in general. Next, agnostics aren't necessarily about on a quest for God's existence. They might be, but they also might be just chilling, not feeling one way or the other about finding evidence. So being agnostic doesn't automatically make you a spiritual seeker or totally indifferent. Also, don't get agnosticism mixed up with apatheticism. Apatheticism is this idea that God is by nature unknowable. Most of the time, people who dig apatheticism still count themselves as believers, so it's a different ballgame from agnosticism. And lastly, agnosticism isn't the same as religious non-cognitivism. That's the view that the whole God question doesn't even make sense, like asking about the color of jealousy. Love. Non cognitivists and agnostics both aren't in the theist or atheist camps. But the key difference is agnostic think the God question has an answer out there. They're just not sure what it is. So, why do some folks opt for agnosticism? The heart of the matter is what you could call the evidential argument. It is based on this idea called evidentialism, which is pretty straightforward. You believe something if there's evidence for it, you don't if the evidence says otherwise, and you stay on the fence if the evidence is unclear. The other key point driving agnosticism is the notion that when it comes to the God question, the evidence doesn't really lean towards theism, belief in God, or atheism, belief there is no God. It's like the evidence is sitting there saying, could go either way, folks. But why view the evidence from God's existence as plain it down the middle? Some agnostics reckon there's just as much evidence for believing in God as there is for not believing. Others take a slightly different angle, suggesting the evidence is too murky to make heads or tails of, like, how do you weigh the problem of evil, which seems to give atheism a boost against those brainy ontological arguments for God's existence. It's a bit of a head scratcher, and that's why some people land in the agnostic camp. Now, let's flip the script and ask, why might someone say no to agnosticism? Basically, every point made for either Team God or Team No God doubles as a reason to give agnosticism the side eye. But there are also some direct challenges to the whole evidence is neutral stance of agnosticism. One comeback to the agnostic viewpoint is this. Sitting on the fence about God's existence is either super hard or pretty much the same as not believing in God, at least in how it plays out in real life. The gist is that believing or not believing in God shapes how you act and think about big stuff, like what happens after we die. It's like saying you can't be neutral about doing something, you either do it or you don't. This idea goes way back to that great American William James and his famous piece, The Will to Believe. It's a heavyweight argument in the tug of war between the evidence focused folks and the more practical minded crowd, and it's a major twist in the agnosticism plot. Another angle against the agnosticism argument is pointing out that a lot of things in life have fuzzy evidence, but we don't just shrug and say, I don't know about all of them. Take ethics or politics, for example. We often have strong opinions in these areas, even though the evidence could be read in different ways. It feels a bit off to say that these beliefs aren't reasonable. So if we can have justified beliefs in these areas with iffy evidence, then why can't we do the same when it comes to believing in God or not? The ball is in the agnostic's court to explain why the God question should be any different. In the world of agnosticism, there are two flavors, weak and strong. But what sets them apart? The key difference boils down to how much you think rationality ties your hands when it comes to God question. Weak agnostics are like, okay, maybe in some cases, for some folks, it makes sense to hold off on deciding about God. They are open to the idea that maybe, just maybe, someone out there could have enough evidence to tilt towards believing are not believing in God. The strong agnostics, on the other hand, are playing hardball. They are saying, nope, if you want to keep your rationality bad, you've got to be agnostic all the time, no exceptions. It's like they're laying down a universal rule. The evidence is always going to be too mixed up for anyone to make a call on God. So if you are leaning towards weak agnosticism, you're cool with the thought that someone somewhere might have a justified reason to believe or disbelieve in God. But if you're on team strong agnosticism, you're pretty much saying that kind of certainty is off limits for everyone. It's a bit like choosing between leaving the door slightly ajar or slamming it shut when it comes to deciding about God's existence based on evidence. Agnosticism has often gotten a bit of a bad rap, seen as just sitting on the fence or not wanting to pick a side. But nowadays, thinkers are getting curious about what agnosticism has to offer beyond just I don't know. They are digging into the kind of outlooks and ideas that come from hitting pause on the whole God question. Some thinkers are poking around at what happens if you stick with agnosticism long term while still dabbling in some kind of religious vibe, or maybe steering clear of it altogether. Meanwhile, others are exploring agnosticism as a kind of pit stop on the road to landing in either the God or no God camp. At the end of the day, agnosticism is shaping up to be a pretty crucial piece of the puzzle. It's like this bridge is spanning the gap between firmly believing in God and firmly not. A sort of no man's land where you can explore and question without having to commit. It looks like agnosticism might have a pretty interesting role to play in the whole conversation about faith, doubt, and what we choose or choose not to believe. To wrap it up, agnosticism offers a unique perspective on the eternal debate about God's existence. Far from being a form of indecision, it encourages exploration and open mindedness in a realm often permeated by strong convictions. As we continue to grapple with the mysteries of faith, belief, and skepticism, agnosticism reminds us of the value in acknowledging our uncertainties and embracing the journey of thoughtful inquiry. Whether you are a believer, a skeptic, or somewhere in between, the agnostic viewpoint invites us all to consider the nuances and complexities involved in the quest to understand the divine. So, with that thought, I will leave you to the journey of your own quest. And meanwhile, look after yourself. See you next time. Thank you.